Hi everyone, this is just a short video to discuss the structure of a C# file in a WPF application. So I'm just going to start off by creating a new project just to show you what the file looks like when we initially create it. So again, we are picking our language, which is C#, which is already selected, and then we're going for a WPF application. Pick a suitable place to store your application, and then of course give your application a name which would represent the purpose of it, and click on create. So this is going to create us the standard default application, which comes with one window for free. By default this is always called main window. Now the core structure of the project is that each window has got two files associated with it. So if we look in the Solution Explorer, we can see here we've got one window and it's got a file which has got a .xaml extension. So that's for the XAML code, which is this code down here. And this code basically describes what the window looks like. If we extend this, expand it, we can see also associated with the window is a .cs file, which stands for C#. And this of course contains the instructions that indicate what is to happen when the user interacts with this window. So what we're looking at today is basically the core content of the C# file and its layout before we actually go and add additional code to it. So when we create a project, we get by default a blank window. If we have a look in the C# file, you'll see that there's already this code in here. So I just want to take time in this video just to explain what this code means. Up the top, we've got a whole section of instructions that start with the keyword using. This basically indicates which libraries your project is using. Now, what do we mean by libraries? So basically, over the years, many people have developed snippets of code that perform really useful tasks that would be useful across all sorts of projects. Therefore, what's happened is these snippets of code have been grouped together and catalogued into different libraries, therefore making it easier for our development because we can use existing code that we know is tested and works well and does the job. Therefore, where possible, we can use bits of code that are already done. So just as you would go to a normal library to get resources, to look at books, it's exactly the same idea. So again, C# has got its whole collection of different libraries. Again, like a normal library, it's catalogued, so it's into different categories. So if you were going in to get a book on computing, you would walk into the library, you would go to the computing section, you then might narrow that down to the networking section, and then you might narrow that down to the security section. So the same idea, all of the different code snippets are in appropriate categories within the library. If we want to add another library to this collection, we can. We simply add an additional using statement, and we need to specify the location of the code we're looking for, whereabouts it exists within the library hierarchy. What you'll notice here is that some of these library instructions are greyed out. So what happens when we create a project is that C# gives us a suggested list of libraries, common libraries that developers use. When we've finished writing our code, what we'll see is that some of these will remain greyed out. That means we are not actually using those libraries. So if you want to be super tidy and neat, what you can do is you can, at the end of your development, you can go back and you can actually remove any of the greyed out libraries as they're not required. It is a good idea to do this if you are struggling for space. So if you're compiling your project and it's going on to an area that's restricted for space, then obviously by including a library, you're including all the code within that library. So if it's not required, it is a good idea to remove it from the list. Underneath the libraries, we've got the structure of our C# project. The way it works is that when we create our own project, our own application, we effectively get our own drawer to put our project into. And that way it keeps it separate from all these other libraries that we've got here. So we've got our own special area. I like to think about it as my own big drawer that all my stuff goes into. Now the official name for this drawer is called a namespace. So we have got, each project has got its own namespace, and everything related to the project will go inside the same namespace. So for instance, at the moment, inside our project, we have got one window. So that will be inside the drawer. If I choose to add additional windows, then they will also be put inside the same namespace. Inside the drawer, we don't just want to throw files in and have an untidy drawer, because if it's quite big, then it will still be difficult to find things. So we actually have a structure imposed within the drawer to keep things tidy. So inside the drawer, each window is stored in its own separate container as well. So this container has got a special name again, which is called a class. So every time we add a window to our project, it gets put inside its own class container. And again, the nice thing about that is that everything related to that window is all in the one container. And then all of the windows related to the entire project are inside one single namespace. Visually, this is what it looks like. So in this example here, you can see we've got our big drawer, which is the orange, which is the namespace, and we have one of these for the entire project. And then within the drawer, we keep it nice and tidy by putting each of our windows in a separate container, which is referred to as a class container. So in this example here, we've got one project which has got two windows. How does that look syntactically? So in order to describe that structure and write it in code, this is what it looks like. So to define a namespace, this is automatically written for us, but it's good to understand what it means. We use the namespace keyword. So that basically sets up the drawer. And this is a label that goes on the drawer. So it's all very good and well having our own drawer in this big massive library, but if it's not got a label on it to identify it, we're not going to be able to find it. So this is a label that gets stuck onto the drawer. What you'll notice is that this label matches the name of your project. So when I created a new project, I selected a location to store it and I called my project structure. So it uses the same project name to provide a label for the namespace. Now I've mentioned before that anytime we want to gather things together or keep things together in a group, then in C# we use curly brackets. We use an opening curly bracket to indicate here's the start and a closing bracket to indicate here's the end. So anything in between those two brackets will belong in that particular group. So in this case, the namespace, you can see after we've defined it, we've got our opening curly bracket, so all of this stuff is inside that namespace with the label structure. So what do we actually have inside the namespace? So the key thing that we have is we've got individual class containers for each window. So if we jump down to line 21 here, this is us setting up our class container. So you can see it uses a bit like namespace, it's got a keyword to say what type of container it is. So it's a class container, and again it's got a label. So the label again is used to help identify the class. And what you should notice is by default it gives the class the label is the same name as the window. So our window that gets automatically created when we create a project by default is called main window. Therefore, it automatically creates a class also with the label main window. Now there's some other stuff on this line, so we've got this stuff here and this stuff here that doesn't necessarily make any sense right now, so I'm just going to explain a wee bit about what these things are. Again, remember this code is auto-generated, so you're never going to have to write this code, but I think it's very useful to understand what it means. So let's take this part here at the end. So this is basically a special operator that indicates inheritance. So what this is saying is that our main window is inheriting all of the properties of a window. And by a window, I just mean a standard Microsoft operating system window. So the standard layout with the cross in the corner. So it's based on a standard window. Before the setup of the class, we've got these two words here. These are keywords again. You'll notice keywords are highlighted in a different colour. Syntax highlighting is very useful because it helps you identify keywords that mean something to C#. So these words in blue have got a special meaning. Public means who has access, defines who has access to this container. So who can actually access this class container and look inside it. Public means that everybody can access it, it's openly accessible. And by default, all of our windows will be the same. The alternatives are they can also be private, which would mean that they would not be, information inside the class container would not be accessible to any other classes or anything else in the project. Partial is used to indicate that this file alone is not sufficient to create the main window. And the reason for that is because, as you know, the main window has got two files. It's got the XAML file that describes the user interface, and it's also got this C# file. So this is basically just indicating to the computer that if you've got this file, this is only part of what you need to actually create and run the window. So the other part you would need would be the XAML file. So that basically defines the namespace, the big drawer, and then this defines the smaller container within that drawer. So the orange part is the namespace, and this is the smaller container that we're currently looking at. So it'd be one of these called main window. What you'll notice is, again, in order to indicate what belongs inside the container, we use our curly brackets. So anything between the opening curly bracket and the closing curly bracket belongs to this class container, this main window. So by default, we've actually already got some code in here. So the class container by default is not empty. It contains one block of code. So this is a block of code here. In C#, this is referred to as a method. So it's a block of code that does a particular task. This one comes for free in that it's written for us when we create the window. And what you'll notice is that, again, it's got the public keyword to identify that it is accessible to everything inside the class. And it's also got a label, so it's got a name. Now, this has got a name that is the same as the actual name of the class. So you'll see that the class is called main window, and so is this block of code. So this is a special method, a special block of code called a constructor. The way we identify it is by this simple fact that it has the same name as the class itself. The constructor method, as the name suggests, is used to provide instructions to the computer on how to construct the window. So how to build the window when the application runs. Inside this block, there is only one single instruction by default. This is a special initialize component instruction. This code has already been written for us. It's embedded in these files over here. You can dig into the files and actually look at the actual definition of it. Effectively, what this instruction is saying is go and build the window using the XAML code. So it's telling it when the application runs, the first thing we want to do is construct the main window, so create it and show it to the client, and that's done by calling this instruction here. And this instruction behind the scenes basically tells the computer go and read the XAML code and create the user interface for this window. Okay, what then happens is after this is where our event handlers get added. So anything related to the main window in this case, will exist within inside these curly brackets. So when we create an event handler, so when we double click on an item in the window and it creates an event handler, it'll automatically add a new block of code and it'll be within these curly brackets. It will be within this class container. So everything inside these curly brackets is to do with the class. The only other thing that we've not mentioned that you'll see inside this code is you'll see these statements up the top here that start with 3 slashes. This is a special notation used to what we call comment the code. So it's used to indicate to the computer that what follows these slashes is just some information about the code. It's not an instruction. The reason we do this is because we should always document our code and explain what it's doing. This makes it easier for future maintenance. So if we write a program and then we come back in a month or 6 months time and we will need to change it, then if there's notes inside the code to explain what's going on, it'll make it a lot easier. By default in C#, we can create comments using just 2 slashes for single line comments. So this is a comment. Or we can, if we want multiple line comments, we can prefix each line with slashes, or we can use a /* and multi and we can put this as many lines as we want, and then once we're finished we do the reverse, we do */. So now it knows that that's the beginning of the comment and it will ignore all of this text because it's just text until it reaches this closing token, which is the */. So comments are very, very important to basically help you make your code more readable and to help others understand your code. So this is the key structure of every C# file. Just to highlight this, one final thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add another window into my project. So to add a window, I go to the project. So at the very top we have the solution. We've then got the project. We right click on the project and we go to add, and then we can add a new item. And these are all the things you can add to your project. So we want to add a window. And again, we can call it whatever we want. So let's just actually keep it simple. We'll just call it window 2. And I'm going to add it. So what you'll see is in Solution Explorer, it has added a window2.xaml file and a blank window. And if I expand it, it's also got the C# file. So again, if I click on the C# file, what you'll see is the same structure as we've already reviewed, but you'll notice that the namespace is the same. So if you look at the window 1, main window, we are inside namespace called structure. So our drawer has got the label structure on it. And if you look at window 2, we're still inside the same namespace with the label structure. So effectively this is what we'd be looking at here. So we've got now two classes inside the same drawer. And again, just to show you, it has created inside the namespace, it's created a class container for our window, which, as we discussed, given the same name as the window. So I called the window window2, so the container is also called window2. And then inside it again, we have one block, one method, which is the constructor method. And again, you'll notice it has the same name as the class. Okay, so that concludes the overall architecture of the C# files for the WPF projects.